Oh, look at that, I broke it. Let's call the meeting to order. I don't believe we need to do anything for remote participation, so we'll skip past that. The agenda, anybody have any changes? Or if I can get a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second? Okay. The previous meeting minutes, has everybody had a chance to look at any updates, changes, comments, concerns? All right, then let's make a motion to approve those previous meeting minutes, please.
So moved. Second.
Moving rapidly along. Public comment, did we have any? See two people in the audience. No, sir? Okay, good. All righty, then no public comments. We're going to move into the first item of discussion, which is we're going to perform design review board hat on, and we're going to take a look at the Marvin Heritage Monument signage, which, if I'm not mistaken, is still being reviewed under what, 150D?
Correct. Yep. So this was on your guys' agenda last month, and I know there were a few questions and comments. Those comments were then sent to Jones Holmes, and I believe Scott is on the call with Jones Holmes, so I'll let him chime in on a few things here in a sec regarding those changes. But I know the two biggest comments were one regarding the material and the contrast of the lettering with the sign in your guys' package. The revised sign package is in there, and it has that. And I know the second biggest question was on lighting. And Scott, I'm going to let you jump in on the lighting aspect of the sign proposal.
Good evening. This is Scott Stearns with Jones Homes. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Good evening. Thank you for letting me have the opportunity to speak. Hunter, I did send over a few photographs that represents the sign from the estates that we did, and our sign proposed today will mirror that look, essentially, as far as the lettering and the background. So I understand the first concern had to do with that. So that was the intent, to provide that for the board's understanding of the way that would look. So did you share that photograph, Hunter?
We were not able to get them in their packets, but I'll pull it up right now and put it on the screen.
So what you have before you is essentially a light background with a bronze pin set signage element that shows the Appalachian State Mountaineers, which is wonderful.
It's getting there.
I'm kidding.
It's trying to pop up. I don't know why.
You have to love technology until it stops working.
Let's do this.
That photo didn't open.
I got them to open earlier.
There it is.
So now on the screen is the existing estates one. Scott, can you see that?
Yes, I can. So that's very similar to what we're proposing here. You have on one side, you have the signage with the naming with a light background, and then a bronze pin set font. We probably will improve the bottom font because this is not great, the bottom font, to make it pin set versus an in-cut piece. And then that's on the left side, you have that. And then on the right, as Hunter has presented, you have the E, which is a column with a light fixture that it just represents, quote, the estates. So we are mirroring this concept at the Heritage. It's going to be called, Heritage at Marvin, essentially. And then instead of the E, we'll have an H. The main difference between the two would be the lighting, which is easier to see on the proposed drawings, which has coach lights instead of this top mounted light. And I know there was concerns regarding glare on the curve of the road, which is well received from us. We certainly would not want to cause an issue from life safety. So the thought I had in speaking with Hunter was to propose that we install the system, and if there's a concern with the lighting, the glare, and the voltage, we could through Hunter and through staff, we could reduce the voltage of the lighting to minimize that glare effect and reduce that down. We could dim it down or reduce the voltage of the lights that are physically on the pillars. So that was our proposal to address the concerns that we understood that P&Z had.
I'm sure everybody's had a chance to review the, what was in our packets, and this looks very good. It looks exactly the same, except, as you said, for the lights up top. Is there potentially, I guess there was, you said there was a concern, somebody brought up a concern that there might be some glare?
Well, one other thing, I recall, now I didn't bring it up, but there was conversation about the uplights as far as where they went or where we're going to be.
Placed.
Yeah.
So Scott, yeah, on the plans with the uplighting, do you have, it obviously shows that it's on the detailed
Correct.
sheet, but it's not, I didn't see any location on the actual plan set. So
Yeah.
that was just one of their questions.
Correct. So typically, what we had at the other location is we have 2 or 3 uplights in the planter bed that's directly in front of the sign there that you see. So right there is 2 or 3 that face the sign. They point at the sign, and then there'll be 1 uplight at the column on the other side that points at the H column feature, which is exactly the way the estate's look. The signage works exactly.
And was that the issue, Hunter, with the glare, or was the glare on the lamp lights? And if so, instead of changing the voltage, can the glass be not tinted, but like a shade, like a little bit opaque? Because I would
So-
imagine you want the same voltage. You want it,
From my understanding with the uplighting, it was one displacement and making sure that it's shining on the sign and not adversely impacting any vehicular traffic. But if it's in the planning box and so on, I mean, it's covered, like it's not. So overall, like I said, they made the minor changes with the light just to make sure that the signage is clear, and staff does recommend approval. These changes were made, and unless planning board has any other questions, then call for a motion to approve it and send it to council.
20 volt, okay. I specifically didn't have any questions. This is pretty cut and dry. My cohorts, anybody? Questions, comments, concerns?
Based on my recollection, which isn't that good anymore, but, I think that addressed all of the questions that were brought up previously.
Right.
And I'm not sure there was any major, it was just clarification is what it was after, I think.
Sounds good. Again, staff has reviewed this. They are recommending approval of the signage. And again, that's going to be contingent upon the engineer and the outside agency review and approval. So somebody would like to make a motion? Well, it sounds like I did, yes. All right, then, do we have a second, or would you like me to read that out entirely?
Yeah, that was good.
Okay. Okey dokey. I'm sorry, all in favor? Okay. Now,
All right, thanks, Scott. It'll go to council at their August meeting, and after that, then we'll get the sign permit. Basically, council will just affirm, and then I'll get you guys a sign permit to get it going.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you, you too. Okay. The second item for discussion was the Charlie Zulu 2024-1 Marvin Grove 2. Hunter, I'll pass that to you.
Yeah, so the village has received a rezoning application from Zepsa Capital. If you guys recall, that did the Marvin Grove rezoning last year. They are currently under contract and works with the trust, the Marvin Historical Trust, which is the references the Crane Store property, to rezone that parcel and basically further develop it. basically classifying it as Marvin Grove Phase 2. So this is the applicant held their neighborhood meeting back on July 27th, somewhere around there, but June, sorry. My mind's all over the place. Back in June, so there was that initial feedback, roughly probably about 25. I do not think I got the report in your guys' packets in time, but they will be provided in your guys' packets for the next meeting. Roughly had about probably 25 to 30 people here, and did include members of council and I believe a few planning board members. Overall, pretty good feedback. Very similar comments and feedback received during this meeting as we heard during the Phase 1 rezoning, which was regarding buffering, the fence, trail connection, and just some other future safety concerns. But overall, the proposal was pretty well received, in my opinion. So with that being said, I'm going to let the applicant, and I don't know if Brian's online, but basically kind of go through this presentation. The intent of this is basically for you guys to kind of see the proposal, ask questions, provide some additional comments, feedback, so then as they fine tune it, this will be back on your guys' agenda in August. Staff's not recommending the board take any action on this today, but we want to then just get that initial feedback where then when we come back in August, be looking for planning board to make a formal recommendation at that time if ready and everything's completed.
Just hit the button to turn it on.
Sir, welcome.
Good evening, Vice Chair, members of the Planning Board. My name is Matthias Young. I'm a land use attorney with Johnston, Allison, and Hort. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Zepsa Capital LLC. And then also, I think with us tonight virtually is Brian Genest with Bolton and Mank. He's with the applicant design team. Zepsa Capital is, like Hunter said, seeking to rezone about 2 acres of property from SFR1 to HDCO, and then add them to a previously approved site plan. If we go to the next slide. Here's both parcels together. This is 9904 and 9908 Newtown Road, so right next door to Village Hall. The total area of this project is about 3.5 acres, and if we go to the next slide, sorry, we can see that both of these parcels are in red right next to Village Hall. It's part of the Marvin Heritage District Small Area Plan. That red coloring is a suggestion for HDCO, which is Heritage District Commercial only. Now, if we go to a quick history on Phase 1, which was rezoned last year, about 1.5 acres, 3 total buildings. So that is the previously existing Crane House plus an addition, and then 2 additional mixed commercial use buildings, uses like retail, restaurant, and office. So Phase 1 was good. We really liked working through the rezoning process, but Zepsa Capital, even during the rezoning process, was thinking, how can we make Marvin Grove better? So, like Hunter mentioned, Zepsa Capital negotiated with the Marvin Historic Trust to go under contract with the property next door to Phase 1. And that's what we're calling Phase 2. We can go to the next slide. Good. So Phase 2 is 2.05 acres. It's currently zoned SFR1. And then if we go to the next slide, we can see the plan for Phase 2. And really, Phase 2 just completes Marvin Grove. There's more open space. Now 60% of the total project, if you count Phase 1 and Phase 2 together, is going to be open space. There's improved circulation. There's now a double drive plus additional maneuvering area, 65 additional parking spaces, 2 additional mixed commercial use buildings. Total square footage on that is going to be about 20,000 square feet, and then a 21,000 square foot pond. And really what's great about Phase 2 is it really just gives Marvin Grove room to breathe. You're improving the circulation and parking on the site, you're increasing the amount of open space, and it connects Phase 1 with the Village Hall for a seamless transition and development, and really continues what Phase 1 started by creating this kind of seamless, walkable village center that was really part of the vision for the Marvin Heritage District. Really, Phase 2 just completes the project. Now, we are proposing 2 additional buildings. The next slide has the elevations for those. That is the first proposed building, and then the next slide is the second proposed building. And just like Phase 1, the ZEPSA design team imagined what this area would look like if it had been historically developed as commercial, and then took basically the buildings that would have been on the property 100 years ago if it had been developed as commercial and brought those forward to the modern day. Now, like Hunter said, this is kind of an initial first look, so that's all I have for you today, but we are very excited to share this project with you and just looking to receive some initial feedback from the planning board and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Matthias, just for clarification, so with those building elevations, is this one the more brick one and this one to be the hardy plank and brick? Like, do you know if it's, which building elevation goes with which placement, do you know?
I'm not sure if
Okay.
they're set on which one's which. Both buildings have the same footprint.
5,000 2-story, so
Yeah.
5,000 each office upstairs or retail upstairs, or you're not making
Yeah,
a decision
basically
yet?
the same kind of mix of uses as Phase 1. More office upstairs, and then stuff like retail, restaurant on the first floor. Kind of activate that first floor
You
for the village
proposing
feel.
an elevator?
Don't think an elevator is planned. If you can see on the second building elevation, there's kind of, at least on that building, there's kind of a walk-up planned to some walkable area on the second floor, and then that also provides some nice covered space for the first floor if you have something like a
How
cafe.
does that comply with ADA?
So it will, I know this was discussed during Phase 1. For any of those spaces up there, we'll have to have ADA compliance, so either a actual traditional elevator on the inside or at least a wheelchair accessible ramp.
Up to
That,
the second floor?
yes. So the wheelchair accessible ramp in certain cases, like on the, let's just use like this one as an example. I mean, you guys have probably seen them on interiors of buildings, but it's basically to get from one level to another if there's no other traditional elevator style. But that is something they would have to comply with if approved during their design phase for the actual, the architectural design for the buildings themselves, the interior design. So that's already been noted even with Phase 1 as well. Because one thing that was discussed in this, and you know, I'm not sure where the ZEPSA team's at on this, but one thing that was discussed is potentially you have this false storefront, and that would be the elevator that would also take you up. And you maybe would have interior access to the adjoining shop fronts, but
I'd highly recommend an elevator.
but all of that would
Yeah, you
be
don't wanna
be
ramp
required.
to the second floor.
Say what?
I'd highly recommend an elevator.
Somebody pushing it up is going to
Oh, yeah, well, a ramp, because for ADA compliance, it's a maximum of like it's 2 or 4% slope. So even at those proposals, I'm not sure, like I said, without having the engineered plans, if they would actually comply, if they were a ramp, if it would comply with ADA compliance.
I mean, there are external elevator, aluminum elevator
Correct.
lifts.
Yes.
That are anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000, $20,000 for as often as you could, because if you were going to have offices up there, it's possible that if there's an attorney, tax,
Yeah.
whomever, they're going to need to get up there. I don't see it being highly used, but it does have to be accessible
Yep.
or available.
I think
Again, it's not an
I hope it
Important
was
note
just
that-
an oversight.
Yes.
Yeah, stuff like ADA compliance, like Hunter said, is going to be addressed during kind of the engineer
Sure.
plans phase. This is,
You're asking for feedback, there it is.
no, thank you for the feedback, appreciate it.
I've got a couple of questions, and they sort of different areas. One is parking ratio. Are we okay with that based on?
So the parking being proposed, and this is, I will mention, so staff, like we have done an initial review. We'll have the full detailed report for the August meeting. But if you guys recall, that was one of the concerns with Phase 1. The old form-based code did not have minimum parking you had minimum ADA compliance parking, but it basically was intended to be more of a traditional type of downtown Main Street district, where you have shared parking and, or you don't set these requirements where you have, you know, mostly parking and then buildings just because of zoning ordinance requirements. With with the adoption of the MDO, we did put minimum and maximum parking standards, parking ratios per uses. Pullman and I actually looked at this today, and so they're providing, in total, Phase 1 had a total of 47 spaces. Phase 2 has an additional 65. So, and you're only adding 2 additional buildings, so it is opening up the space, and so it's a total provided of 120, 112, yeah.
Retail's ratio is 5 to 1, so you've got 10,000 square feet of retail on the bottom floor. That's 50 parks right there.
Yeah, I think I've got I think the minimum required parking for office is 1 per 350 square feet,
I know.
and then that max is 1 per 200.
So
Yeah, so we reviewed it.
5,000 square feet of office would require, do the math, somebody.
350,
Yeah,
it's basically 3 spots per 1,000.
How much?
It's 3 per 1,000, yeah. So that would be a total of 3, that's 15.
3 per 1,000. You've got 10,000 square foot of office, right? That's 30.
But there's in the MDO, it's a ratio for mixed use developments and the overall percentage, and that's where, like, we looked at the proposed uses with the restaurant and all this stuff, and basically I said we have not dove fully into full compliance for the staff report, but at the initial review, this is sufficient per the new terms of the MDO.
Sufficient, maybe, tight, absolutely.
All right, a couple of other, and this is probably more for you in my foggy brain as far, will they have to come back to us or you or council? They've got this occupant for this space, because I remember a lot of conversation about uses, et cetera,
So what,
originally.
yeah, so let me explain, even though this is the application is basically amending the original conditional zoning, meaning that even though it's 2 parcels, the intent is to where when you're amending the original conditional zoning, you're amending the site plan, the development agreement, all that. And so basically they're amending that to then have everything under the one umbrella per se, where this is one total plan. Instead of going through rezoning of just the Crane Store property, where then you would have 2 development agreements, 2, in theory, technical site plans. You also have 2 different ordinances that were in effect at the time that, if approved. And so it was recommended that we do the amendment, so we update those terms of the development agreement so everything's under one umbrella.
The new current.
Correct. And to your point, with the adoption of the MDO, we expanded permitted uses in the Heritage District. Not free-for-all saying these are all the uses you get, but for basically saying this is what to consider and looking to scale back. And that's where, those are things that I want Planning Board to start thinking about, looking at the table in Article 8, and thinking of any uses that potentially should be recommended to be excluded. Again, it's conditional zoning, has to be mutually agreed upon, but we've already had preliminary conversations with the applicant, and they're not looking to change their original approval. It's, like I said, it's all supposed to kind of fit in that same mold. So, but since those uses now, it's the difference between the uses in the form-based code and the uses in the MDO. The form-based code was generic. It had like retail space, a maximum of like 5,000 square feet, where in the MDO, you expand what those retail uses are. So in theory, this is actually more protection having them under the MDO, because there's certain uses that could have been technically classified as retail that weren't clearly defined like they are now in the MDO. So that will be one thing that staff will be working on with the applicant over the next month, and have a list of permitted uses, basically what they would be foregoing per se, as well as applying for. But in regards to uses for I think one of the, if I recall, the last, in the Phase 1 rezoning, it was like only one restaurant. With the site kind of opening up, it's, those are things that can be discussed, but it's hard to you're then kind of taking away how some of these buildings, like kind of that free of how they can be occupied. So, but it's still something to think about.
All right, and I get the last thing, and the Marvin Trust, or Marvin Heritage Trust, or whatever they're called out, they will come to us at some point in the future regarding that building, assuming that they do something? Is it sort of, I guess it's sort of, and I don't know whether you're buying or joint venturing or how this works. Anyway, how it fits into the picture in the future.
So Zepsa Capital is currently under contract for, so Zepsa Capital is purchasing the property that's part of the rezoning. The historic trust is going to retain ownership of the part of the property that has the Crane store currently on it. We're still kind of figuring out if there's going to be, something between the trust and Zepsa as to the Crane store, but
That
nothing-
sort of, trails off on the real question on that, but, so.
You have it under
And-
contract to purchase?
Yeah.
So if you're purchasing the entire lot, right?
No.
No,
you're-
so-
You're excluding the Crane store
Well,
proper parcel.
Yeah, let me, I'll try to handle this one. Okay, so the property, because the trust owns the whole 2.25 acre, or I think it's actually just 2 acres, is their specific piece. They have signed the application as the property owner because it does include that property. The Crane store is still a part of this rezoning, but because basically what they are doing is this becomes a site plan. It can't be not included a part of this rezoning and not rezoned, because then you're creating a non-conforming lot at that size. So if it were to remain residential, zone residential is what I'm trying to say. It is a part of this rezoning, it's just classified as basically out parcel, as an out parcel. What the preliminary conversations as Zepsa and the trust people, the group, as they negotiate the kind of vision and everything for this property, it's basically the terms of some of the development agreement will really scale back permitted uses on that. On top of 2, we will still have design standards and elevations. Last time I did talk to Peter about this, is that they don't want that building to sit there and be dilapidated and then have this development right beside it. So I think they're basically trying to work on an agreement of potentially Zepsa and them renovating the building, and elevations will be provided potentially a part of this rezoning application. And the actual vision and uses of that, like I said, we would scale back as part of the development agreement. So basically in the development agreement, the terms would be, permitted uses for, and we would classify like building 1, 2, whatever, or phase 1, 2, and then you would have permitted uses for specific out parcel. And it references the site plan, so it's classified, or not classified, clear on the site plan of what each building or out parcel is. It's the same thing how we did Marvin Gardens back in 2016.
Just see it getting a little squirrely in there, the reason I'm
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still working out the exact,
That's
what's going to happen.
0.3 acres.
0.3 acres that's why, so the property.
It'd have to be a storefront. You couldn't have any parking on 0.3 arc.
So, and that's why it's not intended to be a standalone. It's intended to be a part of this quote-unquote development, this master plan with this, because you don't have, like I said, that's why when this preliminary conversation came up with the applicant, like even before the application was submitted, there was no way to subdivide that and make it a compliant lot with its current zoning unless it was rezoned. So if it's part of the zoning and the whole property, even though it's being subdivided and out parceled, or basically it's a lot line revision, but the whole property still is being zoned or being proposed to be rezoned to Marvin Heritage District Commercial only. Minimum lot size in that for shop front and is I think 8,000 square feet.
So part of what we're doing is we're rezoning that entire parcel.
Yes.
Even though .3 acres is not part of the project.
It still will be protected as part of the project, meaning that, as I'm saying, like, the elevations and things, that's where the terms of development agreement, and I've had this conversation with Peter, and the Crane Store owners are aware of this, and they're supposed to be a part of this process, is that, like, they're not getting a blank check.
They're not what?
They're not getting a blank check. The elevations and everything for their store will either be a part of this rezoning, and if not, then that will be a term that they basically have to come back through.
Plans are before we rezone it?
That's what I'm saying. That's why it's being specified as an out parcel. So the out parcel it's still part of this whole rezoning, but it will have specific terms specifically that only apply to them regarding permitted uses, design, and all that stuff, if it's not fully figured out.
It's kind of messy.
So it's going to be two conditional zonings that we're going to sign off?
It's all under one umbrella.
It's all going to be on one. Yeah, so there's going to have to be a bunch of work that's done.
It's messy.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, like I said, that's the reason I brought the question up. I can just see it,
well,
Yeah.
I don't disagree with you, John. Based on square footage, 13,000 square foot, what kind of store are you going to put in there, and how many, again, spots that could potentially
No,
require?
.3
I mean, if you made it
acres.
mass-
Yeah.
It's .3 acres,
Yeah.
right, but the 12,000 square foot, it looks like the building is.
12,000 square feet of land,
Right.
of land.
The
not of building.
existing,
Yeah, that's the land square footage.
the existing building, the Crane Store is only 1,448 square feet.
Building on there now.
So what?
Building on there now.
Yes.
I don't know how that can qualify for anything if you don't have any, I guess unless you share the parking behind.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. That's why it's all part of one umbrella.
You're going to have an interesting month, basically.
So everything has been, all that's been discussed with the applicant and their team. But that's why, once again, this is kind of preliminary. That's why there's no being formal recommendation being made tonight. It's comments, feedback to where it allows the applicant then to finalize some of these terms, because as part of the rezoning, like I said, we are updating the development agreement. So the terms of those development agreement, meaning conditions, mutually agreed upon conditions between the applicant and the village, will get updated and put in as part of that development agreement. It's updating the site plan that's referenced in that development agreement and all that. So it'll have specific terms specifically for what I'm calling the out parcel one, which is the Crane Store out parcel.
it's gonna be a busy month, and that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity, I guess, when you come back, all those questions we're asking, and
That's
You'll
why
have answers
it's nice
to
to
all of
be, it's nice to get this kind of initial look so we can, figure out what questions we've got and hopefully hammer that all out over the next month.
I was at the public information meeting, and there was some concern with the neighboring subdivision, the preserve, about the access from at the end of a cul-de-sac that has an access trail that goes to the main trail, and then
Yes,
having access to this. Was there anything that was discussed or thought of to mitigate that with any kind of gate or anything on the
where we should,
development side?
on the plan here.
So I think Hunter's pulling up the currently submitted site plan.
See, I don't have.
If you look kind of
Right.
towards the bottom right there, that is so that's the trail.
Right.
And then connector kind of comes off right there.
Right.
And that is shifted farther down from where the Phase 1 connection was.
Phase-
It's a lot closer to Village Hall.
The Phase 1 connection was right here,
Okay.
roughly. So the intent would be to not have that pedestrian access there, but potentially have it spur right here, where then, because that's literally right here. And, this comment and all this stuff came up, same as in Phase 1, and it was presented to council to potentially, if they wanted to just get an easement, and council wanted to go ahead and just have them construct that little connector portion, because, with people's behavior, if you don't put that there, then you're gonna end up having a goat footpath most likely. if it's being used as much as people, I mean, so, going ahead and creating that, pedestrian access was, and it's in the plan, it's in the ordinance to do so as well.
Another question regarding the wet pond or the retention pond. Once everything's developed, it's going to stay there as, you know,
So that's
an
the idea.
area to, you know, enjoy being around or walking around, whatever.
Right, that's a permanent feature.
Right. Is there going to be any kind of aeration for that? And I ask because of, you know, to possibly mitigate any, you know, mosquitoes or anything like that? Is that? I was going to suggest any kind of fountain or.
Retention pond?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
starting
So
as
this is-
retention,
Will be a wet
but then it would be a landscape pond.
It's oversized for a couple things. One, per our stormwater ordinance, they have to, in short, the simplest way to put this is your post-development drainage has to meet, post-development drainage off-site has to meet what the pre-development drainage numbers were, meaning that if you're having excess amount of sheet water, whatever from rain, whatever that pre-development drainage flow and stuff, your post-development's supposed to meet that. In short, and the other thing that they have to is that you have to look at your drainage basin is kind of the best way to put it. So basically, what other water are you taking from other properties? And kind of take all that into consideration when they're sizing this. And that is a low point. It was also discussed with the applicant, and this predates even the phase 2, kind of where we're at now, but potentially doing more of a regional stormwater pond even to assist with the amphitheater and certain things like that. Those conversations were being had last year. At that time, the owners of the trust property weren't necessarily on board with some of this, just because when they were looking to develop their site as by themselves, look how much of that's taking up their site. So, but that's why the pond, like I said, it is upsized for if Village Hall or the Village Hall Amphitheater Park and stuff needs to be able to flow to as well.
Will there be plans submitted for the detention pond as well, where the water's coming from, pipes, underground pipes?
Yeah, all that, so all that is part of the engineering. So if the rezoning is approved, then they would move into their preliminary plan, the engineering phase, and that's where all of that is more specified,
Okay,
which,
yeah, I'd like to see it.
yeah.
So the completion date is going to be kind of part of the development agreement process. And, you know, we'll have to look at whether having the same completion date is just engineering and like construction feasible wise. But that's something that's another thing we're hoping to work out over the next month as we finalize the development agreement.
Yeah, and so in short, and I have talked with Peter and their engineer, Tom West, on this, is that if approved, the site development, meaning the parking, stormwater pond, all that stuff, would all be basically part of phase 1, because it's all, because all the infrastructure is going in the ground, all that stuff. The actual construction of the buildings would then be what would be further down the line in that development timeline. Yeah. So, and once again, kind of think of like Marvin Gardens as an example of, like, you know, they built a Publix and they built the building that's attached right beside it, and I guess there's one other building, and then they came back a few years later, but all the infrastructure was there, the parking, so all of that would be put in, because one, it's part of the plan, and so that's why the engineering, one, that's part of the reason why they have delayed submitting their engineering plans for phase one, because if they're moving forward with this, they might as well, I mean, it's for the whole site. No, the original phase one, part of the terms of the development agreement was building one, which was the existing house and the commercial kitchen, was the development timeline was between 1 and 3 years for that after approval. Or what was phase two, but building two was then 3 to 5, and then building 3 was 5 to 7. And that was just rough. Say what? But it's the construction of the buildings that's kind of the time frame, not necessarily the development.
So the addition of phase two is a 40% increase in open space. So and then if you count phase one and phase two together, total project area is going to be about 60% open space.
And one thing we'll mention, and this is another comment that was received during the neighborhood meeting, was preserving of trees. And I mean, it's a fully wooded site, but you can kind of see the outline of some of these larger mature trees. They have done, you know, and I wish Brian was on the call because he understands it. And this is, you know, something we look for is that preserving the existing trees as much as you can. And so you can see how the site kind of sits up, and there's certain trees being preserved. I think we counted about 33 of the larger mature canopy trees that are on the existing site. So some of the higher quality trees to be preserved on top of, they will have, you know, additional evergreen screening and stuff as part of the mitigation. That's one question I do have for, and I don't know if you know the answer. I might need, originally with phase one, you remember they were not proposing a stormwater pond. They were going to have an on-site underground infiltration system, which is part of the reason too why they proposed to not pave the parking lot. It is staff's recommendation with this, now that the size is open up and having the detention pond, that it would be paved. But you do those planting boxes in the curb, where all that's at is like during the development process, they would put tree protection fence up, and like they would, once again, we would review the engineer plans and those would be preserved. It's not a far-fetched concept. It can be done, but that's why some of them are, like I said, are wider in certain areas to make sure that the critical root area of those trees are being protected during during the development, but then even after the fact. But I don't have, I know you guys had this for phase one, but I do not have an existing tree survey for phase two yet.
Still working on
Yeah.
on the existing tree survey. But I mean, kind of like Hunter was talking about, really kind of the centerpiece of the entrance, like the new double drive entrance, is this beautiful mature magnolia that the design team went to great lengths to make sure stayed where it was and stayed protected. And if you look at kind of the two additional proposed buildings, you can see they're kind of canted off just a little bit. That is actually, the design team went ahead and shifted the footprint of those buildings to continue to save more mature canopy trees. Mm-hmm.
Correct. So a little background on how, I mean, in short, like how this all got started is obviously phase one got approved. There were a few minor concerns throughout that process regarding access, which the original approval was specifically for the top piece of the property, which was going to be right in, right out. The parking lot was going to end up stubbing here, but you know, those were concerns. I mean, even staff had those, but at the same time, like you do these things to basically have this future development connectivity and stuff. And conversations were then, I recommended to the applicant of like, hey, you know, what's the opportunity? Because they heard the concerns about parking and ingress egress and just overall functionality of the parking design during the rezoning process. And they started out with having a basically access and shared parking agreement with the trust property. And so that's how you then kind of got this initial that. And then those conversations, I believe, then led to where we're at today, where then they moved to make an offer and are under contract and further developing it. But those concerns originally heard in phase one rezoning was they did everything even after the fact of the approval, even though they didn't have to still keep finding ways to make their product better and make sure that these concerns were being addressed.
For those who were not at that public information meeting, one of the things that came out, and I'll point, you probably don't know, in regards to that, dedicated in, dedicated out, there's a curved concrete median that runs the entire length of all of that, so they can't get any turning
Right.
traffic.
So access.
You
to
can
from
see
the
that
side.
if you know what you're looking at on the plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right,
good job.
right in, right out only for the site.
Excellent. So Hunter, what can we expect then to see next month?
So staff will finish up their review and get the additional information and have the staff memo as well as some of the, we'll probably go ahead. Basically, luckily, we already have a development agreement, so it's not like we have to start from scratch on that thing. But updating those terms, and we'll probably, the simplest way is probably just highlight those for you guys so you can kind of see the changes, because most of it's not, it's just generic terms that our attorney, when our attorney drafted the original development agreement for the Jones Homes rezoning, it's became a template. So be updating some of that, and then we'll kind of go into, I want you guys to over the next month, think about the elevations, permitted uses. You feel free to go ahead and email me any comments or thoughts that you have on those. But ultimately, we'll dive into some of those more specifics and get some of those questions answered. And staff, like I said, then prepare a compliance report with the MDO on this proposal. And, with everything, it complies, and staff will be looking for the board to make a recommendation at that time. And if not, once again, it can be tabled, but in September I would think we would definitely have everything done by.
Anybody, any other questions for Matthias? All right, thank you very much. I mean, very good information. It's, I like some of the architectural renderings, I think.
Thank you all for your time, and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, Hunter, I think you have a planner's update for us?
I do. I do have one item, and I did not have a chance to put this on the agenda tonight. And once again, this is kind of just information. If you guys recall, we had that rezoning submittal that you guys reviewed at your June meeting regarding the property in Weddington Chase being rezoned from SFR3 to SFR1. I had further conversations with Mr. Laughlin about this, and we, if you guys recall, during the adoption of the NDO, that very, very first zoning map had Weddington Chase zoned as SFR2. And then that's when some of the concern from staff was like, whoa, I do know of certain cases where that houses could be, quote unquote, the non-conforming. Mr. Laughlin has been getting me basically existing surveys of some of these properties. And so staff is potentially going to look at, or staff is looking into, and as of right now, I'm about 99% sure we're in the clear on this, is to propose a basically zoning map amendment for the whole neighborhood, just to be zoned SFR2. Once again, it wouldn't change anything from use standpoint, wouldn't change anything that, they haven't been either through when they were RUC under the old ordinance or now under SFR3, but it would be something that's more consistent, or that, consistent with the nature of the neighborhood. The out of the surveys that he's provided me, there was only 1 or 2 properties, I believe, that were a non-conforming structure per the ordinance. So if you guys remember, so you have a non-conforming lot, which means the lot size is less than the minimum lot size of that district. There is maybe 2 or 3 of those out of at least, I know, all of Phase 1 of Weddington Chase. Minimum or non-conforming lots are not really the issue. You can have a smaller lot as long as the structure, because the structure, if the structure is non-conforming and if something were ever to happen to it, whatever, then they would have to build it back to conforming, and that's where then you run into some of those issues. The 2 structures that have been identified per the final as-built survey, one of them I think is roughly 7 feet off the side property line. The minimum side setback in SFR2 is 9 feet. But if you guys recall, we have Article 14, which is flexible development standards in the new MDO. Article 14 allows for basically a minor variance to be granted by staff. If you guys remember this conversation, because you guys asked me what it should be, and I'm like, look here, I'm not asking for the world, but I think, within reasonableness, and the structure can encroach into the side setback at up to 2.5 feet. So there at 9, that brings you down to 6.5. So in theory, that would then it doesn't really create a non-conforming structure. So that's where, from a staff level, I felt more comfortable going this route. And like I said, instead of having one property zoned SFR 1 or 2, or then potentially having more property owners apply for that rezoning, it's just easier to potentially do it all in one fell swoop. So that's something that will be probably presented to you guys at the August meeting. Like I said, it's basically just rezoning the neighborhood from SFR 3 to SFR 2. So, but staff just wanted to confirm that it's not creating any non-conforming structures.
And at this time, how many neighborhoods are looking to ask us to rezone from one to the other?
No,
Been requests?
there has not.
Okay.
There are 5 neighborhoods zoned SFR 3, and all of those are the neighborhoods that were annexed into the Village of Marvin. All were originally approved through Union County under different zoning ordinances. For example, I think Providence Glen literally has like a minimum 25-foot front setback, 25, so all those lots varied, and that's what the RUC was, is it basically said, whatever's on the plat is whatever, it was a vested district, whatever stays. Nightmare from an administration standpoint, because even to Weddington Chase's thing, you had 2 phases that if you look at Phase 2 plat and Phase 1 plat, the minimum lot sizes and setbacks are different. So that's where, consistency with the adoption of the MDO, and it was, we put together all the information looking at those neighborhoods and the minimum lot sizes and setbacks on those plats, and that's how those all got basically classified as SFR 3. But I want to say Weddington Chase is the only one that I can think of off the top of my head that really would, zoning at SFR 2 wouldn't create any nonconformities, and out of the minimum lot sizes and setbacks on the other plats of those, the other SFR 3 neighborhoods, I can't say with a certain that it wouldn't potentially create any nonconformities there. So it's not being requested by any other neighborhood. It was just something that during the process with Mr. Laughlin, on top of during his neighborhood meeting, it kind of dawned on me hey, this isn't, it doesn't bother me. I just want to make sure that if this is what we propose, it's not going to create any non-conforming issues for those residents with their property, because that's the last thing we want to do. Any questions on that?
So you think you'll be bringing that back around?
I will. And the last thing I'll mention is he's been discussing this with his neighbors, and we had 60, 50? 60 that he's spoken to out of, the neighborhood's 272, but for the most part, it's like I said, I think at the end of the day, as long as it's not changing anything for them, in theory, where it's taking something away from them or not, then you're not going to have any issues. But out of the 60 that he's spoken to, all but one, I think, said they were supported being rezoned as SFR2, and that one that didn't support it was only to make sure, I think, to make sure that the side setback, that their structure complies, and then they would support it. Is that correct? Yeah. So,
Will those residents sign something?
yeah, I've got all the documents. So, like I said, this is something that would, ideally, in a perfect world, with the MDO, we would have, been able to look at. But the other big thing is that neighborhood was annexed in, so I don't have all the construction documents. I don't have all the final as-built like I do for neighborhoods that have always been in Marvin. So it was something that I had to go look at old zoning permits and try to, if there was one, and try to then figure out if there were properties that potentially would create an issue being zoned SFR2. And there was one in specific, and I was like, kind of close, and there was a couple, if you look, and GIS isn't 100% accurate, but like kind of looking on GIS and other things, that's why I was just recommended just, hey, SFR3, we know does not create any nonconformities, and it's close to what's on the plat. So, but overall, that will be brought back to you guys, and it'll either be all of Weddington Chase or at least just phase 1. So, and we'll do it all in one fell swoop, so it's consistent map, and it doesn't create any funky looking zoning map.
Gotcha. Very good.
We've got two other short things. Council did approve amending your board terms to match the pattern described in the MDO. So that was done at the last council meeting. They also went ahead and did the initial appointments to the Board of Adjustment. So Kelly, Rich, Ken, and Kelly, Rich, and Ken were appointed as regular members. We still have 2 serving regular members whose terms will be up in March, after which we will recommend appointing Marcus and John to those seats, and Michael and Will were appointed as alternates. So that's been done. And the last bit of news, which is the best news, is Ptolemy has been hired as not only our planning technician, but our deputy clerk, and she is now full-time.
Very nice. Congratulations.
So she has been taking the minutes for tonight, and she will be the board secretary very soon going forward.
Excellent. Salt. Congratulations. Other updates?
I'm trying to think. Other than that, just existing developments ongoing. Obviously, the Heritage at Marvin is under their land construction. Broadmoor's water and sewer system did get fully accepted by Union County. So that means, one, those houses that have been under construction for a while can now start the closing process, as well as that does line up for the connection for the Heritage to the Broadmoor pump station. So all of that, but it's estimated that Jones Homes with the Heritage will probably, I would say at the earliest, later this fall, potentially start initial home construction. I do know that the final plat's been recorded. The last update I had from them on the pre-sale of their lots, they were averaging 1.3 million for the homes in the lot, and that's even before those homes get into design. So that was as of a month ago. I know that when they initially opened it up, I believe out of the 68, they already had 15 sold within the first day. Wow. So,
Hopefully that's not a venture capital company that's buying those up. Hopefully they're individuals. But
I'm about positive it's individual.
that's why I'm.
But other than that, you'll be seeing, like I said, that developing, and I am anticipating another rezoning application or 2 for Heritage District developments, but other than nothing formally submitted yet. There's conversation been had with those property owners, and I know that they are in the process of gathering their or getting their materials and their proposed plans. So that's another thing coming down the pipe, and if we ever don't have one of those submittals, we will then do Board of Adjustment training. So, but other than that, that's all I got, unless you guys have any specific questions on anything.
Anybody questions, comments? Action items? Or it seems like some of the action items may have been lumped in there, but,
I don't have anything specific.
Yeah.
okay. Well, let's jump to board member comments. Marcus? Or, excuse me, Bob. Hail to the chief. I'm good. Mike?
Congratulations. Thank you.
I'll make sure to pronounce your name right.
Yes, Palumbi, congratulations. Yeah. There you go. Again, congratulations and welcome officially. So that's great. And staff, thank you very much for everything that you do. We appreciate all the time you put in. So make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
I'll
That's
second.
it. Hoo-ah. Do you want me to Palomi and Austin? And write mine?